Well, welcome everyone to this afternoon session. We are talking today about enterprise solutions. This is a customer journey, and we're focusing today on the SMB marketplace. My name is Laura Vaughn, and I'm your moderator for this session. I am with 180 Systems. If you don't know already, 180 Systems is an independent consultancy firm. We help companies choose the correct software, the appropriate software for their business challenges. We also help with implementation projects as well. And this afternoon, we have two panelists joining us. I think you're really going to enjoy this conversation today. I know I really enjoyed the humor and just sort of the unique approach to this conversation when we sort of unpacked what we would cover this afternoon. So I want to introduce to you today Jeremy Ellis and Robert Pope. Jeremy is the VP of Business Development and Operations at Transoft Solutions. He has been at Transoft since July of 2019. Jeremy, are you on screen? I can't see.
I am, yeah.
There you are. Okay, just give us a wave.
Hi.
So, thank you. Transoft creates very specialized software for aviation, civil infrastructure, and transportation. And Jeremy has been involved in a bunch of different areas in business, from product development. He's done sales and marketing. He's done overall company management and business development. He sometimes, although not very often, is referred to as Dr. Ellis because he has a PhD in computer science. And he is currently a member of the Transoft Solutions executive team. He focuses on business development and operations. Jeremy, delighted to have you here today for this conversation.
It's a pleasure to be here, Laura.
Awesome. And with him is Robert Pope. Robert is the Global Channel Director at Cooper Perry IT. And Cooper Perry is a technology company. Rob's going to explain this a little more for you, but Cooper Perry is a technology company and also a firm of CPAs. So they are a multiple Microsoft World Partner of the Year award winners for Dynamics 365, Business Central, and Dynamics Inner Circle. He is focused on purpose-driven digital and supporting SMBs and CPAs, helping you benefit from what he calls the democratization of Microsoft technology. I'm delighted to have Robert in the panel this morning. And Robert tells us that when he's not working, he tries to spend as much time as possible playing with anything with wheels, whether with or without engines. And I got to ask, what's your favorite thing to play with on wheels?
Well, firstly, I've got a very understanding wife who lets me play with lots of different things with wheels. So I have a toy box. I'm a big mountain biker. If COVID had behaved itself, I would have spent a lot of time in Whistler. We were there the year before. Wow. I've also got a bit older and perhaps not quite as talented as I used to be and a bit more stupid. So I've now moved into motorbikes, and also I've got an old classic Porsche, which is the other part of the reason why my wife's so understanding, is because that can sucks out as much money as I ever get coming through the front door. So,
well, you got to live a little.
Yes, indeed.
I'll turn it over to you two. Thank you for being here today.
Thank you. So, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome. Thank you for joining this session. And as Laura said, I'm going to kind of start off with a little bit of an introduction. You can probably guess from my accent that we're based in the UK. We do have an operation in North America, in both Vancouver and then also in Texas. But really today's session is to kind of give you a bit of insight into the trends that we've seen in SMB. This journey for those customers is really a very different journey to the ones that enterprise customers tend to experience. Our SMB customers generally have people within their organization who carry and wear a number of hats. They don't necessarily have the resources to be able to spend big on ERP and finance solutions. And subsequently, they're often very reliant on their accountant or their CPA. I think actually it's probably worth kind of just giving you a bit of insight, a bit more about who we are as Cooper Perry by way of introduction. So as Cooper Perry, we've been around for, well, just over 170 years. This was our bunch in 1850. As you can see, they missed out on the diversity and inclusiveness training. And who'd have thought that a bunch of accountants would be middle-aged, slightly bald men? But hopefully we've moved on from that over the many, many years. We've gone through Spanish flu, which obviously gives us some insight as to what we're going through at the moment, through the 2 world wars, and through lots and lots of other ups and downs as we've grown from being an accountancy business in the Midlands in the UK into the organisation that we are today. And the organisation that we are today is a very different organisation. 15 years ago, part of Cooper Parry split off to become Cooper Parry IT, which is where my role sits. And we took a very conscious decision to start to specialize in Microsoft technology, particularly into the Dynamics platform and particularly into SMB. It's something that we saw a lot of our SMB customers want help on that journey as CPAs, as accountants. And actually, it became something where we've decided to not only just help direct them, but actually then subsequently help deploy it. To fast forward to the last couple of years, Microsoft brought forward a platform called Business Central. And one of the reasons they've asked us to host this session today, and we're very grateful to Microsoft for involving us in this, we really sort of took Business Central to our core. Business Central, for those of you who aren't aware, is an SMB-focused finance, accounting, ERP solution. And when we talk about SMB, generally we're talking about organizations up to about 500 employees or so, but also down to those kind of one user, mom and pop type organizations. And one of the big benefits of Business Central, and this isn't a sales pitch, is that scalability, is that you can go from 1 to hundreds very quickly. It's all the same platform. The other part about Business Central, just to put it into context for some of you who may not be familiar with the name, Business Central is in effect the SaaS version of Dynamics NAV, or Navision, as many of you be familiar with. It's also the roadmap for organizations that are currently using Dynamics Great Plains, and also SL, or Solomon as it's also known. So Microsoft 4 or 5 years ago put a big kind of pile of money on Business Central, on Red for want of a better word, and positioned that as being their go-to solution into the future, and spent a lot of money investing in how that solution will work and be embedded within the rest of the Microsoft toolset. And I'll talk a little bit more about that later on with regards to some of the things that's had an impact on within that SMB space and that usage of technology for those organizations. But in the background, in the last couple of years, we became the Microsoft World Partner of the Year for Business Central, winners in 2019, finalists this year, and also part of the Microsoft Inner Circle, which is the top 0.5% of partners worldwide. We've also changed as an organization hugely. We've expanded into North America, also into Australia, but also there's a cultural shift in our organization that's very much moved away from that traditional accountancy base, very much more focused on new methods of working, and also new methods of working with the evolving SMB customer base. So what I was going to talk to you about really is then the things that we see and we've seen as being the issues that have been in SMB. And actually, there's a kind of a moment of truth here which changes somewhat based on what's happened in the last couple of years. And I don't just mean COVID. So before I joined Cooper Parry a year ago, I worked at Microsoft in the UK. I ran the Dynamics SMB business, broadly speaking, under a number of different titles. And was responsible for Dynamics NAV and everything that really operated in that SMB space. And I think what's fair to say is that actually you could have presented this slide 3, 4, 5 years ago. And actually probably many of the other vendors in the market, people like QuickBooks or Sage or NetSuite, could have also presented this as a slide that detailed the issues that SMBs have. And to be honest, nobody at that point really had an answer for it. In fact, I would argue that even now, some of the vendors don't really have an answer for it. It's all well and good presenting those as issues, but actually being able to do something about it is really where technology has evolved, and really actually where we see a number of factors come together, not just in the way that we operate, but in the way that accountancy and CPA has come to the table. The other big thing is that a lot of SMBs are not big enough to go through this whole process by themselves. They don't have huge IT teams. They don't have highly paid specialists who can go through their business with a fine-tooth comb. They're often heavily reliant on their CPA, their accountant, to guide them, to give them direction, and to give them the platforms that they should be looking at. But also that brings another piece to the table, is the CPAs then need to be up to date. They need to know what's changed and what's become to the fore. And I think there's a couple of key things that have come to the table, certainly in the last couple of years, particularly around AI and machine learning and cognitive services, which I'll touch on in a moment, which have really changed that game and democratized a lot of what is available to SMBs from the kind of technology that was only previously available to real enterprise customers with huge teams. And when we look at where that SMB is now, this siloed systems piece has always been an issue. In fact, when I used to sit at Microsoft, I used to kind of think, well, actually, we're not really fixing that. Actually, we're just replacing the silo of a Sage platform or a NetSuite platform or something else with, broadly speaking, another silo, just a slightly shinier version of the same thing. And actually saying we're getting rid of that is perhaps not really telling the truth. Because actually what generally happened, there was an awful lot of duplicate data. Those silo systems sat outside of the system. They needed integrating to, they needed securing differently. They didn't work with a lot of other tool sets that the user was familiar with. And also in SMBs, generally the people doing the manual process had more than one job. It wasn't easy to pick out a job where people were doing things thousands of times over necessarily that you could then replace with technology, because most SMBs, people, as I said, wear many hats. But also one of the biggest parts that we've seen is that, particularly actually through COVID as well, which has really shone a light on this, is this reporting piece, this insufficient reporting, the inability to necessarily have access to some of the data that you may need as an organization. Not just to how to run your business, but also we see in various other sectors where government loans or even banking and finance, there's a far tighter control now on those SMBs. And not a lot of the smaller SMBs, broadly speaking, ran their business kind of on the back of a napkin. If there was money left in the bank at the end of the month, then everything was good. If you're suddenly having to go cap in hand to a bank to borrow a large amount of money to keep your business afloat, that's just not going to cut it. They're going to want far better detail and far more information. And the other piece that we see particularly in SMB is security. I think that cloud story has changed significantly over the years. The cloud once was kind of seen as the Wild West, the kind of you put your stuff out up in the cloud, who knows, you can't touch it, feel it, you can't kind of take that server and put it in the boot of your car if you ever needed to. But that's changed considerably. For those of you who've got any interest, you can go and look at Microsoft Trust. And bear in mind, I'm not just talking about Microsoft. All the vendors have really had to take this by the scruff of the neck. But broadly speaking, now when you start to look at an organization that's on premise, they're the ones that are actually more at risk than those that are in the cloud. If you look at the way that Microsoft secures an organization, the way that Microsoft takes responsibility, not just for the information that's in Outlook, for example, or OneDrive, or in Dynamics for that matter, but also the wider play. The wider play of being able to secure a mobile device, even if it's an Apple device, raises all sorts of potential security questions as soon as you start to step out of that area. But I think as a CPA, there's also another side to this, that actually CPAs kind of, and I think I would exclude pretty much everybody who's on this call and listening, because given the nature of this session, I'm of the understanding you're all drinking the Kool-Aid as we speak. But a CPA taking the general ledger or the accounts receivable data out of their customer's QuickBooks system into an Excel spreadsheet and then emailing it to their home Gmail address so they can work on it from home, that's not secure. And we know that happens. So being able to be part of that conversation with the customer has been a key part to this, which has been something that's probably outside of the traditional conversation many CPAs and accountants have, is actually understanding where the cloud sits and how to use, and in many cases, the sort of things that we tell people about are things that people have already got access to. A lot of the technology that Microsoft and other vendors include within their package does need switching on. Things like multi-factor authentication, the kind of thing that you all do at home now with your PayPal account, where it's linked to your mobile, so you have to put a PIN number in as well as having a password. Those kind of things are the kind of things that you're used to now in your consumer life. They're the kind of things that are available in Microsoft technology as well, often where the prize is much bigger. So we start to look at those issues. We also really start to look at where we see some of the future from a CPA perspective and what's changed. Arguably, the biggest thing that's changed is machine learning, artificial intelligence, cognitive services. If I go back to that original slide I just showed and said about the other vendors, and everybody would turn up and kind of say, hey, these are your problems, these are the SMB issues, our solution's got whiz bang and does all this super shiny stuff. I don't work for Microsoft anymore, but broadly speaking, everybody's answer to that was funkier reporting. Pretty pictures sell software. That was the whole adage, always has been in that world. And broadly speaking, none of those platforms had significantly changed. Realistically, you could have bought any of them and they would have all done pretty much a kind of fair to reasonable job. There's always some nuances around the edges that some are better or worse, but broadly speaking, they all kind of do the same sort of thing. When we kind of then, and that fundamentally was, we talk about this, it's data over forms, forms over data with a bit of reporting. And it was the reporting that obviously that we used to be the bit where actually you could kind of get some slightly better reports and then slightly better reports. And maybe you'd have to keep paying somebody to write those reports for you, but at least you could get at them rather than not have them. What we've seen in the last couple of years, and Microsoft and other vendors are very much in this world, is the impact of machine learning and artificial intelligence, and actually the democratization of that into SMB, so that SMB customers can have access to this technology, which is the sort of thing that historically was in the world of enterprise organizations. And when I talk about that, I'm talking about things that an SMB can actually see in their business. They can receive an email in Outlook, for example. Artificial intelligence is reading that email, understanding what the customer is saying in natural language, and then guiding a user and saying, hey, it looks like this person who sent you an email, it's this person. This is what we know about them. This is what I think they want. I think they want to order some of these items. Or actually helping an organization deploy technology like materials planning or advanced forecasting that historically would have meant a lot of setup by a lot of expensive people and then a lot of expensive monitoring to keep it on its rails, where actually machine learning does all of that without even needing setting up. And that's that democratization. But broadly speaking, for CPAs, this brings a lot of other impact to an organization as well. It kind of prevents that historic viewpoint that CPAs are often pushed into. This is what you did last year, last month, last quarter. This is your tax returns for that period. Actually, a lot of the value from a CPA and an accounting organization has been able to understand how that organization works and then how to reflect that into something that can be proactive. What we see also then is this move now of being able to have a Dynamics platform and other vendors, obviously, but having that platform where a lot of that history, that siloed view, that incomplete data is now taken care of by AI, machine learning, and cognitive services. And it may not all be here today, but the roadmap is absolutely jam-packed with things like that are going to help into the future. The other thing to bear in mind in this, and this is, I think, where we're going to see this sea change amongst the vendors, is that technology that Microsoft have brought to the table is not something that they've developed specifically as an ERP vendor or an accounting or finance vendor. That's technology that is born out of being a hyper cloud scale, global cloud scale provider. That kind of technology is born out of things like Cortana, for example. It's been brought out of Xbox and Skype, the ability to understand natural language. That kind of technology is not being built by ERP and finance providers. That's being built by the likes of Apple, the likes of Microsoft, the likes of Google. And interestingly, actually, in that SMB space, certainly from a business perspective, Microsoft realistically is the only one that plays in that space. Apple and Google don't really have propositions from a business perspective in that arena. I think we're going to see that as a bit of a sea change, as being able to use that technology, but gives a massive step change. That's the bit that's pushed and kicked this into a different park. And we'll hear about some of that as well with regards to the kind of things that Jeremy and Transoft do later on, where they sit. And actually their business itself is incredibly interesting because of what they do as an organization, not less the impact of Dynamics on their organization supporting that. And a lot of this comes back to delivering outcomes. So that ability to kind of say, actually, this is what we think the future holds. As an SMB, that was always ridiculously hard to do. It was almost kind of some sort of wizardry or Harry Potterness going on in the background. Whereas now, actually, this is a kind of thing that machine learning in Dynamics starts to give a better understanding and a better picture. So before I jump into some questions with Jeremy, I thought just kind of focusing on that CPA role. And I think this role has obviously been fast forwarded, for want of a better word. Now, obviously, I'm based in the UK. We have operations in North America, as I said, and in Australia. Everybody's been touched slightly differently by COVID, depending on where they are in their cycles of lockdown. In the UK, we basically can't go anywhere. None of us, pretty much. In fact, even our Prime Minister got told off just for basically riding his bike to a park 7 miles away in the last couple of days. But what that's done is force-fed a lot of that change into the SMB marketplace. They've had to change. They've had to evolve their organization. And the CPAs and the accountants are at the forefront of that. A lot of that has had an impact on being able to access technology from anywhere. You can't work from home if you have to get in the car and go to the office, because you can't access your accounts and finance solution effectively over any device from anywhere. You can't also then give access to your staff who maybe have to self-isolate, for example, or work from home because they've got childcare. But also that reporting and all of these things that kind of really sharpen the mind, that for many of these organizations, the accounting platform, the finance platform, is arguably the oldest thing they have in their business. It's the oldest version of anything. Everything else they've got is much more up to date. Office 365, Teams, OneDrive, all of those components now are evergreen. They're all, in effect, the most up-to-date version all the time. And that's bred a very different change in the way that organizations adopt technology. That want and need not to have version lock, not to be, I'm stuck on this version and I can't go to that version because we've done something here that prevents me to do it without a big cost. But also they've seen that this is flushed through and brought through a very new generation of business owners. I think one of the things that Jeremy will talk about, and our approach actually is very much about a move away from big consultancy. Like, we don't sell professional services in the traditional sense. We don't do day rate. It's not our approach, is to kind of do something as lots and lots of days. It's also about what we call fixed outcomes, fixed price, terms like minimal viable product. Use the software as it's being designed to be run. Don't go twisting it out of shape. And actually, for many SMBs, they don't necessarily know what good looks like. They kind of know what their problems are, what their pains are, but actually don't take them down the route of kind of them making it much bigger and more complex than it needs to be. And one of the reasons why we're successful, and without bragging too much about it, is the fact we have this kind of, it's fixed price. We've already told you what you're getting and what it's going to get and what you're not going to get. We're not trying to kind of make that take a lot longer and cost more. And I think what we also see is there's this generation now of business owners and decision makers who have been through the painful process of an ERP implementation. They did it 5 years ago, 10 years ago. They've got people they play golf with or meet at the pub with who've been through that process. And everybody has got those war stories of how it took longer, cost more, didn't deliver what they needed to. By the time they eventually got what they thought they were going to get, the world had moved on 2 years. So that generation of business owner is looking for more bang for their buck. They're looking for kind of good, cheap, fast. They want all three. They're not going to fold on either two of them. That whole MVP, minimal viable product approach, is something that changes. But also for the CPA, that changes then on how you advise those organizations. I get asked a lot, and used to get asked a huge amount at Microsoft, to respond to RFIs and tenders and ITTs, generally written often by consultants. And in 9 times out of 10, we'd refuse. And I think that has an impact. One is, there was kind of, and I guess this is kind of peering behind the curtain of being an IT provider as opposed to being an accountant, because obviously an accountant, you're kind of saying, hey, we have to help you, we have to guide you, we have to bill you for this service. And on the other side, the IT vendor is saying, I want a low cost of sale. I want to be able to sing about what's good, and I don't want to be twisted out of shape. Now, in our world, we also don't want to be trying to sell lots of big complex projects, because that kind of, again, twists us out of shape. So we want this fixed price piece. So if it doesn't fit in our box, we'll walk away. I think what that tended to then end up with, and for many organizations, even those that still have that traditional professional services approach, going through that whole tendering process at SMB, and I hasten to add, this is at SMB, it's not at enterprise level, this is at SMB level, where the size of the project is still relatively small. You know, we're not into millions of pounds at this point, where tenders and those kind of things have a far bigger place in. But actually, you tended to find that, and when I was at Microsoft, this used to happen all the time. What happened is that the only partner that would respond was the partner that wasn't busy, and ergo, you could perhaps take a view that, and actually they possibly weren't that good, because all the good ones were always really busy. So therefore, you couldn't get them to respond. So you almost shrunk down the pool of people who you were going to help get, who that organization was going to get help from, by approaching that way. But the other piece is that there is a whole new business model for CPAs. A lot of the tech skills that as accountants we used to have to rely on, have to invest in, you know, how to build servers, how to do networking, how to do all the kind of technical pieces, that's all being engineered out. Business Central, or NAV as it was historical, or even Great Plains, To set that up would probably be a good couple of days' work. You'd have to build a server, build up the databases, and install it, set it up, go around all the PCs of all the users and set them up as well. That just doesn't work like that anymore. You can go to a website, put a password in, and put an email address in, and you're pretty much good to go. But that also means that this ability to then set up and configure and support is where the role of the CPA is something that we feel is that evolution. That, hey, all that hard stuff's been done. You've still got a certain amount of money. Let's go do cool stuff. Let's go show you about AI, machine learning, cognitive services. Let's use Business Central as a Trojan horse, in effect, to be able to get an organization to a point where we can actually help them do the next thing. It's a place where, as a CPA, you can use that as a way of delivering high value advisory services, as opposed to doing all the work that was in the background. And the other piece, I think also, and I did touch on this earlier, is cloud security. How do those organizations really address and be conscious of the huge uplift that there has been over the last year or so, certainly in the UK and North America, where we've come, of phishing attacks, of basically changing telling them to change bank details, the horror stories that we hear constantly. And I think a lot of this is about how a CPA can start. Microsoft provides a lot of free training around this. We actually, as an organization, have a program, and we're with the IT part. So we help CPAs, we help accountants sell Microsoft technology to their customers. We do some of the clever work underneath around the technology piece, but it helps the accountant have a proposition that they can position. And that security piece is one of the key parts to that. So hopefully that's been useful. I'm now going to just introduce Jeremy, and if you just all bear with me 1 second, hopefully the technology will work. So Jeremy, I'm going to just introduce you. You are one of our customers. Firstly, thank you very much. We are incredibly grateful. For those of you on this call who not aware, it's actually now 8:15 on a Tuesday night. If it wasn't for COVID, I'm sure we'd have other things to be doing, but as it is, we're a captive audience. So Jeremy, would you like to please tell us a little bit more about who you are? I know Laura introduced a bit, and what your organization does.
Yeah, thanks, Rob. Appreciate that. I think Laura did a pretty good job in introducing me. My title is VP of Business Development and Operations. And on the operations side, I'm looking after the systems that are in use in the organization at Transoft, and looking how we can get best use of those systems and the technology that's coming about as we move forward. So, quick introduction to Transoft. It's a global business. Although I'm based in the UK, it is headquartered in Richmond over in BC, and we also have offices in Montreal and Waterloo as well. But in addition to that, we are a global organisation and have 9 other offices worldwide, which, including those 3 in Canada, brings us to 12. So we're operating out of the UK, out of Europe with our office in Rotterdam, right over to Australia with an office in Sydney. So rather than going through all of them, just gives you a flavour of the type of environment that we're working with. We are 180 staff, there or thereabouts, and we focus on providing software to civil and transportation, road safety and aviation. And what we're focusing on is providing us best of breed software within those spaces. We originally grew organically. Over the years, there was an organic growth period, but more recently that growth has been through acquisition. And that's where I actually came into the organization, as Laura said, in July of 2019, when the company that I founded in 98 in the UK was acquired by Transoft. And we'd previously worked very closely with them since 2005. So the company now is approaching 30 years in business, and you'd think by then we would have had all our systems screwed down and in place and working well. But we are, as you've mentioned in your introduction there, in your overview of the environment, working with a place that is continually evolving with systems, and there are new things coming to the table all the time. So it does take we do have to take it upon ourselves to constantly be reviewing those systems that are coming in.
So when did you first start this journey, and how have you kind of ended up carrying the responsibility for it?
I was probably the person who didn't duck quick enough, but in all honesty, the ERP project was on our roadmap from the beginning of 2020, and I had the responsibility of looking after that as a project. Whilst it wasn't directly related to the COVID situation, certainly the pandemic highlights the efficiencies that can be gained through this type of digital transformation that everybody has been talking about. I mean, digital transformation in itself sounds like a bit of a buzzword, but in actual fact, there's lots going on in the world of technology, and it has been highlighted by the pandemic that unless you're taking advantage of these things, then your business is slowly slipping further and further behind. But I suppose because of all the acquisition activity that had occurred within Transoft, it meant that the business was running with multiple accountancy packages. Some of them were out of date, some of them were newer, and it presented its own challenges in itself. Time to close off every month continually gets longer as we go by, as we acquire more companies. Consolidation at the end of the year has become a mammoth job with the different systems that we're using at the moment. So there really was this need to look at what was on the market and see what would stand us in good stead going forward. Another driving factor, and you're talking about pretty pictures, but there is a lot of sense in the fact that we do have to provide more timely and accurate reporting to the exec team, so that these decisions that they're making for changes in the business that come about when the environment hits in different ways, that they can make on the basis of having the information in front of them. As you can imagine, with our business, I talked about the aviation software that we provide in the aviation space. We have had to pivot to combat the downturn in that area, and we need to have all the information at hand. So where we are now is that we've made a choice of system, and we're very pleased to have appointed CPIT as our partner to implement that system, and we're looking forward to starting towards the end of Q2, Rob, to actually move forward with our chosen application.
Thank you. And can you just sort of break that down? And I think obviously for the people on the call, one of the reasons why we brought you along to this to kind of share your view is you're actually in the process of like the decision making. You haven't gone through the whole journey. So this is actually the journey you're on currently. Can you just break down a little bit more about why you chose Microsoft and specifically Business Central? What kind of factors were incorporated within that led you down that route?
Okay, yeah, certainly. So as you say, we chose Business Central. That's where we ended up. One of the issues that we have being a software company in the past is that we can always produce the best software in whatever industry. And for many years when we were setting up the company, we were running on homegrown systems to make sure that to support the business. But the learning really over the years has been for us to focus on what we're good at, providing software to our industry, and look at the professional applications that are around and partners like CPIT that can best support the business moving forward. So one of the systems that we have in place in the business for our CRM system is Microsoft Dynamics. And we're just completing a project to move that from on-premise to on-cloud for all the very good reasons that you highlighted in your intro talk there. But however, despite the fact that we are a Dynamics user, we weren't welded to the Microsoft ecosystem, and we took our time to review what was on the market from different providers. Another key learning for us was that if you've not taken the opportunity to review your business support systems in recent times, you'll be surprised with the wealth of changes that have taken place in the area. And these might have passed you by. So terms such as cloud computing. So traditionally all of the accounts systems have been on-premise, they've been installed on servers in the organization's offices. But obviously with cloud computing, that installation now and the responsibility for that can take place and be put on the cloud, and we can harness the power of the cloud. Obviously remote working, that's another area that's changed significantly over the last 12 months. And with the licensing ability for subscriptions now with not just Microsoft technology, but other providers, it allows you to scale up and scale down based on your needs. No longer are you buying an application and you've got so many users that can log on to it at any one time. You can turn it up and down as you required. And I talked about that digital transformation. It's not just in finance that we're looking at it. We are experiencing that across the business as a whole through marketing and sales, HR, customer services, and also operations. And I did want to pick up on that piece that you were talking about with regard to disaster recovery and security of the systems. It's important to make the distinction that in the past it has always been the responsibility of the IT department to look after all of that data and have a plan in place that can get you back up and running if disaster did strike. But actually, with the changes that have taken place with the move to cloud and the amount of emphasis that companies like Microsoft are putting into securing your data, actually that is the best place for it now.
We find it helps people sleep at night, particularly in SMEs who don't necessarily have huge IT teams who can look after this stuff and trust them to do the backups, take the tapes home, put them in the safe, everything else that goes alongside it. Microsoft's backup and other vendors, the backup and the way that they geo hold that data, again, comes back down to that global cloud scale provider, having data centers in multiple locations. So you can fail over to other countries. But a lot of that also, I think, becomes part of your procurement process as well. You would be able to sort of talk through kind of how you did the beauty parade and how you got to the point where you are now. How did you plan it?
Well, I think one word really sums that up: carefully. It's obviously a big undertaking from our part, and we wanted to get it right. So what we did, because of the existing system, the existing dynamic system, we spoke to our incumbent MS partner to initially understand what was available through them. And we looked at the size of the project, the likely resource that was going to be required from us internally to commit to this project. and to get sort of ballpark costs. And whilst Microsoft applications had an advantage in our assessment at that time of alternatives, it was due to this advantage really with compatibility with CRM that finally made the decision for us to standardize on that technology, which allows us to future-proof ourselves in a way for future integrations that are coming down the line. The other key factor for us was our research suggested that Business Central provided the localizations that we need to operate within the global environment with the different offices that we've got. Unlike other solutions, in many cases, this was an important thing for us, and we needed to have something that was scalable as our company continues to grow. So we were taking all of these things into account. Most of the applications offering the localization and functionality we required were designed for much bigger enterprises than we are, so usually requiring significant internal resource to implement. And conversely to that, the lower cost applications didn't offer the sufficient flexibility that we required to operate on a worldwide scale. So those were the things that we took into consideration, and I suppose just to put it succinctly, Business Central was something that wasn't too hot and it wasn't too cold. It was just about right for our size of business and the way that we operate. And that's when we made this decision to talk to our incumbent MS supplier. And the next phase, which is actually where CPIT came in, we were double checking the accuracy of the information that we'd acquired by talking to our partner. And also we wanted to get a competitive quote for the implementation. I suppose one of the other learnings here for us was that not every partner's approach to providing the system, which would be the same at the end of the day, was in fact the same approach. And you touched on again in your slide presentation, the traditional approach is based on a time and materials, which is actually quite difficult for the end customer to budget for and get a true understanding of what the situation is and what is required. And this is where I think that the unique approach that was taken by yourselves to offer a fixed cost discrete package that we could easily understand really added value to the implementation that you were suggesting. And it gave us a much better understanding of the project size. And actually, we hadn't thought about doing this minimal viable implementation at the time. We were looking at it and trying to understand everything that there was to understand with Business Central, which actually arguably isn't our role to do anyway. We should just make the decision and then let the partner come in and do that. But actually, with taking an MVP approach, as you've outlined there, allows us to get the system in, working to our needs, and we can fine tune it over the years in the same way as we've done with other systems. So I suppose actually the whole process from the initial discussions that we had took over around about 12 months in total.
And I'm quite slightly conscious of time, so I've got a couple more questions, and then I think I can see some questions coming in on the chat, so I think we'll try and put them up. But I was just going to ask you a couple more. So, and I guess this is obviously you talked very eloquently about why you kind of went down this MVP, why the impact of the decision. Now you've done it, what would you have done differently, and what didn't you like in that process?
Okay, so I'm not sure we would have done it any differently in terms of what I didn't like. I didn't like the length of time it took for us to go through that, but I'm not necessarily sure that we could have done it any quicker than that. Maybe we spent too much time really trying to unpick the system and understand how the database was set up and how it interacted and integrated with other systems that we had. And actually, it was difficult to understand the elements to see how they did integrate rather than just take it on face value that it was structured well and they would. I suppose another area was of difficulty was trying to get to the bottom of the offerings when partners had conflicting information for us, and that can be difficult to understand what that is all about. But I suppose the other point that I made about the traditional way of billing time and materials, that really wasn't something that would have worked for us in deciding on this application.
And last question before we move on to the ones that are coming in. Obviously, COVID's had a huge impact on the world. Do you think that's speeded up your process? What other impacts? Like, obviously, one of the key parts to our delivery is it's all remote. We don't go on site. That kind of is a different approach that many. Are you comfortable? Are your teams comfortable with those kind of things? What impact do you think COVID has had and is going to have on not just your decision, but also the deployment and the delivery phase?
Well, funnily enough, I think actually, as a result of COVID and this digital transformation, people working from home has actually had a positive effect on how comfortable we feel with a remote implementation. Before, we would have expected someone to be coming into our offices to give us the presentations, to also be showing us how it would be rolled out and actually working with us hand in hand. But everybody has got so much more comfortable with working in remote environments and attending conferences in the way that we are now. The world has changed, and that's actually had a beneficial impact on what the way that CPIT will be rolling this out for us.
Cool. Thank you very much, Jeremy. Laura, are you there?
I am. Hello.
Hello again.
Thank you. Thank you for that great discussion, for sort of pulling back the curtains and letting us see how things have been, how the journey has looked for you, Jeremy. We appreciate that. One of the questions in the Q&A was around the scope of your project. And I know you haven't implemented yet, but what applications are you intending to implement? What applications are you is Business Central going to provide for your business? What areas?
Okay, so Business Central is going to be our main accountancy package.
So finance.
For finance, and we obviously have the dynamic CRM system for sales engagement piece, and we have for customer service, we have another system there. But Business Central is mainly the accountancy piece, and the comment, I suppose, is that the key point here is the localizations, because we are rolling it out across different offices around the world. We needed to have those localizations in place in order to do that, and we are rolling that out in discrete packages. So we're going to be starting off with the head office and then rolling it around to the other offices, so that in time we will have completely moved over from all of the incumbent systems.
Yeah, and well, you haven't done it yet. So the question in the Q&A was, how does your accounting team like the Business Central portion, and how was the transition from your current GL system? So you haven't made the transition yet, but what's the appetite for change? What's your accounting? What's the level of support from your accounting team? What are they seeing that they're anticipating for the future?
So that is a good question, and I'm going to be answering it with some slight trepidation here. So there's obviously buy-in from the exec team, and our VP of Finance was the person that was driving us to look at these systems because the existing applications that we were running weren't fit for use. And the important thing for us to here is to involve all of our accountancy teams across the globe, and providing them the relevant information, the relevant training, and the relevant insight as we go through. And I think it's fair to say the initial meeting that I had with them just before Christmas, there was a level of reservation amongst the team. But one of the great things was that I quickly rolled up the Business Central offering on the cloud, and assigned it to each one of them, and they had a demo application that they could go away and play with their heart's content. So it's really sort of managing that expectation. But like any new system, there is a level of trepidation there, which has to be managed very carefully.
And are you doing some specific things to try and be intentional about managing change and staying ahead of some of that? Maybe it's not resistance yet. You call it trepidation, but trepidation often turns into resistance. What are you doing to be intentional about staying ahead of some of those concerns?
Yeah, so this is where we're going to be working very closely with CPIT, because at each stage of the project, we're going to be rolling it out and being very transparent with our users. But CPIT are going to be working with key members of the accounts team, and they're effectively doing the trainer side of things to help roll it out and smooth that out. And maybe Rob has a comment on how that's worked with other organisations.
I think this comes back to, and there's a number of, I've seen some of the other questions that have come up. There's a couple of things that are very specific around Business Central. Business Central is Microsoft's go-to finance platform at that SMB level. It competes now with people like Sage, NetSuite, QuickBooks, those kind of organizations. A lot of the big kind of key points is the way that it works in what Microsoft would classify as the business productivity platform. So in kind of layman's terms, it works in Outlook. It works in Teams. It works where those people are familiar with. So in a lot of other vendor solutions, the user will receive an email saying, hey, I'd like a quote or an order for something. The first thing they actually have to then do is leave Outlook, the place that they live their lives. They have to leave there, go and log into something else, go find the customer record, go and do all of their work. And then, in some of the even more sophisticated instances, they're still saving a PDF to the desktop, then going into their email, then writing a response, and then attaching the PDF to it. A big part of what Business Central is doing, the accountancy piece to some extent is a given. It's restricted by legal and fiscal requirements, so there's only so much you can do around that. And I noticed one question where somebody was saying, expecting people to change is this fixed price piece is about putting a model in place that allows people to get very quickly to a state that they're familiar with in how they're using the system and using it correctly. The big benefit then comes the fact it just makes their life a lot easier. They stay in Outlook, they stay in Teams, they stay in the platforms that they're used to. They also have, and this is another big part of it, is many of those organizations, and given the footprint that Microsoft has with Office 365, those users are now familiar with things being added and updated on a constantly. It's an evergreen platform. There is no version lock. There's no kind of, it stays like this, you use it like this forever. Actually, training is an ongoing thing. And a lot of people understand that in their consumer life. Facebook adds new changes in LinkedIn adds new things in. People constantly evolving. And the way that Microsoft builds that training into place is not just, we'll teach you how to do it once and then you can kind of slowly forget about it over your lifespan of using the product. Training is an everyday thing. And changing to that structure, that evergreen structure, is something that creates a big opportunity for CPAs as well to kind of say, hey, look, you've got this bit in now, you've got it working. Here's this other stuff that's already there. You just need to switch it on. And actually, that means there's a constant cycle of improvement without having that sort of log jam of, oh, you've got version 6, you can't do that until you upgrade to version 8, and that's going to cost you a big pile of money and a lot of upset. It's no, you've just got the most up-to-date one. It works. Just switch it on. It does change. It is a different mindset. It isn't necessarily for everybody. People, and this comes back to those different business owners and those different buyers. Some people just want that because they know it's easy. It will get them 80, 90% of where they need to be for significantly less time and money.
Great. Thank you, Rob. We got about 5 minutes to go. So I have one question that I'll pose to both of you. Maybe Rob first, and Jeremy will let you have the closing words today. What advice would you give to another organization that's setting out on the same journey that Jeremy just went through of selecting, evaluating where to go next with their technology? What one piece of advice would you give to these people, Rob?
I think there's two. It's not even one. I'd say two. Being cheeky as we often are in this world. There's an element of, and there's two parts to this. One is credibility. First of all, the people you're talking to have to be credible. Often for an organization that's an SMB, it's difficult for them to understand. The Microsoft world, it's quite clear cut. It's about having accreditations and having staff that have got those accreditations and kind of the badges that show that knowledge and that understanding. The key thing about that training piece, and this is where Microsoft help organizations kind of separate themselves, is there a huge volume of investment that a partner has to make on keeping their staff heavily trained, heavily updated, so that they know what's coming. Once you've established working with a partner, and the same is true for other vendors as well, like go for people who know what they're doing and who have got the badges, for want of a better word, then listen to them. Because they've spent all that time and effort on getting to that point. Let them educate you and help an organization on understanding. And I would argue, obviously, our approach is one way of doing it, that MVP piece, which is counterintuitive to many partners. Like we're saying, no, spend less, get it up and running, do it like this, and then you can maybe change things later if you need to. But if you haven't done this for 5 years, you don't know what you don't know until you've actually started using it for a period of time. So establish the credibility of the people you're working with and then trust them. And I think having a CPA involved and being able to guide that credibility piece is a key part of it.
So leading on from that, that trust element, I would say once you have got that level of trust with a provider, don't get too hung up on the detail and don't try and do their job for them. Just make your decision, do your due diligence, and then hand over to the partner who is then going to be able to provide that for you. And I suppose, just to be cheeky like Rob, the second piece of advice is don't be afraid of everything that is available these days. We talked about digital transformation. It's not just a buzzword. It is cloud computing. It is remote working. And systems are changing all the time. So with having cloud installations now, you are always up to date, and actually you won't have to go through this process again. And finally, I'd just say good luck.
Thank you for that, Jeremy. There's no question. It is an involved process and requires some due diligence. But I love what you said about don't try and do their job for them. And we see this even in our world, clients who get so hung up on every single detail. And the vendor is just trying to help them see the forest for the trees. And oftentimes it stalls the decision-making or stalls the implementation. It just really, really bogs down. So I think what both of you are talking about is trust, establish trust because there's the credibility there, and then let them show you the way. So really, really good advice. Thank you. And thank you to both of you for being here today, of course, and for a very dynamic and fun conversation. We appreciate it. Thank you to all of our participants who jumped in online today. Thanks for joining us. I'm sure you can find Rob. Can they find you at a booth or anything? In the main lobby?
I think we're part of booth. So if you go to Microsoft, you should be able to find us. If not, Robert Pope, CooperParryIT.com. I'm on LinkedIn.
Awesome. Thank you very much. And enjoy the rest of the conference, everyone. Bye for now.
Thank you.
Goodbye.